Last time I spoke with you, I mentioned F.W. Boreham, who lived from 1871 to 1959, who led scores of thousands of people in many countries, including New Zealand, Tasmania and Australia, USA, England. He led scores of thousands of people to laugh and to weep, and he turned thousands of them into Christians. I wonder if you can see his face. This man was noted because of his wonderful personal nature. He was modest, kind, gentle, courteous, as well as very intelligent. How come? Well, one reason is he suffered a lot. And suffering either makes you sour or sanctified. When he was only 14, playing around near railway lines, an automatic change of levers knocked him off his feet, and a locomotive coming at that moment rolled over his right leg. It was doubted that he would live. But this boy, one of 10 children, did survive, but with an artificial foot for the rest of his life. And that leg recurringly broke down. He had about 5 accidents because of that leg, and an accident could put him in hospital for weeks or months at a time. But there's a clue here about life. We mentioned the text in John's Gospel near the end where a disciple says, "It is the Lord." And I suggested to you that the only key for overcoming the constant tension, the fear caused by the certainty of uncertainty, the only remedy is to believe in the sovereignty of God. As I pointed out, we're talking about God's ultimate, not only his immediate care. When he told the disciples that some of them would die, he went on to say, "But not a hair of your head shall perish." So God looks at the ultimate as well as the immediate problem. And this is one man of millions who has proved that all things work together for good to them that love God. Now I want to talk to you about someone very different. Maybe you have seen the movie The Inn of the Sixth Happiness, and you possibly know that the famous actor who played the Mandarin, the Chinese Mandarin, died straight after the movie was completed. But I wonder how much do you really know about Gladys Aylward. Gladys Aylward has been the theme of a number of biographies, perhaps the one by Alan Burgess, which I hold in my hand. Perhaps that is the best. Let me remind you of her story. She was diminutive, she was uneducated, she was poor, but she became a Christian and practiced being a Christian by standing on soapboxes in Hyde Park and London street corners and inviting people who listened or laughed to consider becoming a Christian. But one night when she heard a young missionary at a nearby church, she felt the impulse that she was to go to the land of which he spoke, China. In those days, about 500 million people. Now, as you know, it's about 1.25 billion, a quarter of the world at least. So here's a little girl, no education, no advantages, but she thinks God wants her to go to China. So she enlists as a parlour maid in London. But first of all, she went to the China Inland Mission to see if they would sponsor her. She trained there for several months, and then the president of the mission called her in. He said, "Miss Aylward, you have tried very hard, but you have failed in every subject you have done. I am so sorry. Besides that, you are 26. If you get to China by the age of 30, it's almost impossible for people to learn the language when they're about that age. I am so sorry. Is there somewhere you can go?" "No," she said. "Is there some employment you can take up?" She said, "Not that I know of." But she became a rescue girl on the slums, in the slums, at the wharves of a great city, where she'd make friends of girls who'd run away from home and were now street women. And she would persuade them to go home, putting a few coins in their hands, seeing them off at the station. But that wouldn't provide the money she needed to go to China. Finally, she got a job at the home of a famous explorer, and she noticed among his books about China. She arrived there with 2 pennies and a halfpenny, so that's a couple of cents. But at the door came a knock, and she was told to go down to see the lady of the house. And the lady of the house said, "Miss Aylward, how much did it cost you to come from your home to here?" And Gladys said, 2 shillings and 9pence, wondering why such a question. The lady of the house said, "It is our custom to pay the fare of all who come to work for us." So she gave Gladys 2 shillings and 9pence. Gladys went back to her room and she cried aloud, "Lord, here am I, here's my Bible, and who's 2 shillings and 9pence? Take me to China." Well, she went to a travel bureau and asked how much would it cost to get to China. £90. She said, "Oh," she said, "there has to be a cheaper way." "Well," said the desk clerk, "there is, but it's by train, and it goes through Holland and Germany and Poland and Russia to Vladivostok, and then you have to go on to Chinese territory." "But you can't do that, Miss Aylward." "Why not?" "Because there's a war on between Russia and China, and it is the aim of this firm to deliver its customers alive. So you see, you can't go by train." Gladys said, "They wouldn't kill me. I'm a woman." The clerk couldn't persuade her. Gladys Aylward said, "If I bring you my earnings every week, will you set it aside? You've told me the train fare's only half the boat fare." The clerk agreed, but he thought it was stupid. Well, she worked every day, many nights, weekends, until she had about £49, the required fare. And in 1930, she's on Liverpool station, surrounded by members of her family, She had two suitcases. In one of them was an old corset of her mother's, and she had sewn a cook's cheque for £2 into the corset, and also some tickets and a pen and one or two other precious things. No man would be so bold as to interfere with a woman's corset, she said. She had two suitcases. Tied to the handle of one was a kettle and a tiny saucepan. Inside one of the suitcases, she had cans of beef and hard-boiled eggs and many other foodstuffs, as well as a spirit stove. In the other suitcase, her clothes, and she was carrying an old rug that her mother had manufactured from a woman's cloak of long ago. So she sets off, and she enjoys passing through Holland and Germany and Poland. But when she comes to Russia, and especially at Moscow, she notices the people are so sad, so woe-begone people, so miserable and so poor looking. Well, the train ploughed on, but it came to a small town and all the passengers got off. And Gladys was told she had to get off. She ignored the command. She had a ticket that said she was to go much further, Vladivostok for a start. But then soldiers came on board and the train rattled on for miles, and then it stopped and all the soldiers got off, and she was told she had to get off. And she could see red signs in the distance, and she could hear shells exploding and bombs going off. She knew she had met the war. She was told her only hope was to go back to the town where the passengers had gotten off. It was now nightfall and it was cold. This was Siberia, Russia, and you could hear the wolves howling from all around. So Gladys took one suitcase in each hand, and in the blackness of the night walked and struggled through the towering trees, listening to the wolves howling. And after some hours she was exhausted. She put the suitcases down to make a shelter from the wind, used the spirit stove to make herself a hot drink, and went to sleep for about 2 hours. Then she got up and struggled on till she came to the town where she should have gotten off. She collapsed on the railway station and threw her rug over her and went to sleep. The next morning, she saw someone that she thought was the station master and some other men. They came to her and they said to her, "You are under arrest." She'd never heard such delightful words. She was so glad to be under arrest. What could she do? They took her into a foul-smelling room, but none of them knew English, just enough to say she was under arrest. They asked for her passport. They noticed she was a missionary. They didn't know what that was. They said, "You should stay in this country. We need machinists. You would make a great machinist. Stay here. Stay here in Siberia." "No, no, no, I'm going to China." She opened her Bible and there was a photograph of her brother Laurie in band uniform, and he looked like a major general. And when she showed that to her Siberian captors, they were amazed. What's more, they said, "We will get you to Vladivostok." They gave her a hotel's accommodation for the night. The next day they took her to a station and they gave her tickets for Vladivostok. When she got out there, days later, she saw a sign, "In Tourist Hotel," with an arrow pointing, and she struggled along to the hotel. The clerk signed her in, but then a Mongolian-looking man with the letters OGPU on his back coat demanded to see her passport and put it in his pocket. And so he promised he would give it back to her that evening. Gladys, glad to have a place to rest, was walking away from the clerk's desk when she heard a whisper behind her, "Don't turn round, but after a few paces, turn to the left and we'll find a quiet place to talk." And she found a girl who spoke English, who said to her, "You are in great danger. They will try to keep you here. You mustn't let that man keep your passport. You must get it back. And at midnight tonight, be ready. There'll be a knock at your door and someone will lead you to the wharf, where there'll be a Japanese ship, and you must see the captain and persuade him to take you to China." Well, Gladys didn't know whether it was real or imaginary, but that evening the OGPU, the policeman of the Soviets, came to her room and he looked at her bed and he looked at her, and Gladys had read enough women's magazines to know the danger she was in, and she shouted, "My God will protect me!" And the man halted. Then he laughed. Then he cursed. Then he went out the door. But he'd been waving the passport, and Gladys grabbed it and threw it over his shoulder into the room, slammed the door shut, bolted it, then stayed up till midnight. And at midnight there was a very gentle knock, and she opened it, and there was a quiet-looking little man there who beckoned to her to follow him, which she did for about half an hour's walking till they came to a wharf, and there was the girl she'd met. And the girl pointed to an office. She said, "That's where the captain of the Japanese ship is. You must go to him and tell him you must get to China." Gladys said, "I have no money to give you." The girl said, "That's all right." Gladys took off her gloves and took off her stockings and thrust them in the hands of the girl, said goodbye, and made her way to the office of the Japanese captain. He was a young man, amazed to see Gladys, and when she told him that she was British, he said, "Well, we must do what we can to help you." And he gave her a cabin, and she found herself later at Kobe, Kobe, a very great Japanese city. And from there she found a missionary office, Christian missionaries, and they made the way open for her to get on to China and then to get to Yangcheng. Why was she going to Yangcheng? Well, while in England, she'd heard at a church that there was a British missionary in China who was 75 years old, who was looking for someone younger to come and help her. And Gladys had written to her and said, "I'm on my way." Now she travelled by mule with a guide, and finally she came to the home of Jeannie Lawson, an old, rather vinegary missionary, but who nevertheless welcomed Gladys. Gladys set to learn the language, and they decided they would set up an inn, and they would catch the muleteers when they're coming into the town and invite them to get a clean room and clean bed and good food and stories. So Gladys was learning enough of the language so she could run out, catch the reins of the first mule of a mule train and pull it into the inn, and the others would follow. And they provided good food. And while they were eating, Gladys would tell them a Bible story. Well, so it went on. This was the inn of the sixth happiness. But Jeannie Lawson had an accident, fell from a great height and died, and Gladys was left alone. But the mandarin of the city had heard about her and he called her in. He said, "We need someone to inspect the feet of women in all the nearby towns, because the law has gone forth that no longer are feet to be bound." Gladys said, "I'm not Chinese, I'm British." He said, "It's all right. They call you Ai Wei Di, which means the virtuous one. You can do it." And the mandarin was very friendly. So she set about visiting all the towns and inspecting the feet of women and having children's feet unbound from close bandages. When she was back at Yangcheng one day, she got a message from the governor of the town. "There's an insurrection at the prison. We want you to come and stop it." She said, "I'm not a soldier, I'm just a little woman." He said, "You have a God, he'll help you." So she went to the prison, and there were men that looked like raving maniacs, chasing each other with clubs, with fear within, much fear, and prayers on her lips. Gladys went through the prison doors, and a big man, obviously a maniac, came at her with a club, and Gladys stood up to him and said, "Put down that club." And he couldn't reconcile himself to this strange vision of a little woman telling him what to do. But he put down the club. She called together the rebellious prisoners, said, "Why are you rebelling?" They said, "We don't get enough food, we've got nothing to do, we are bored." So Gladys went to the governor, told him what he must do: better food and provide work, so these men will be much happier. And so she quelled the prison riot. But not too long after, planes came overhead, dropping bombs. Japan had been at war with China for years, particularly from 1937, and now they were bombing this town. Gladys was in a house that collapsed under a bomb. She was pulled out from the debris, and she organised rescue missions to go and pull other people out of the collapsed houses and to care for the wounded, the dying, and it was done under her directions. Then one day she learned the Japanese patrol was coming near to the town, and she thought of all the children. They all loved her. She told them stories. She said to the parents, "The children will be in danger if the Japanese come. Let me take them. We'll go over the mountains and over the Yellow River where there is safety." Parents were only too glad. So Gladys, the virtuous one, the little woman, sets off with a little food. Some friends accompany some of the way, carrying the food, up the mountains, down the other side. No helpers now, and there's no rain. So the children lick the rocks of the mountains to get some moisture into their mouths. After many days, they come to the Yellow River, but how can they cross? So Gladys gathers the children and says, "We must pray for a boat." And they prayed for a boat. And one day a boat came, only too glad to help Gladys and the children get across the river. But they still had a long way to go. They were bundled into coal trucks of long, long trains. But at last they met people in charge of a refugee organisation, and here the children were provided for. But there were still more problems. Japanese were now bombing this side. Gladys was rendered unconscious. And one day some Chinese peasants rolled out of the back of their old carriage a bundle that looked like an old rag doll and dumped her on the ground in front of a Scandinavian American Christian mission. They took her in. She looked nearly dead. They found out she had typhus. Providentially, another missionary visited them, and he had special tablets he'd gotten from America for typhus. And they gave these tablets to Gladys, and she slowly improved. But there were bombings, and Gladys would shake and quiver with every bomb that dropped. They sent to a hospital miles away. We need a doctor. We need him quick. He came. And when he looked at Gladys and he heard the bombing, he said, "We've got to get you out of here to a Baptist hospital, long way away. What's your name? Who are you?" But she couldn't talk. They didn't know. She looked as though she was British or American, but she was dressed like a Chinese girl. So the doctor phoned up a hospital many miles away. He said, "When a train is coming this way, I want you to put on a special carriage. We have a very important person that's got to come back to you, and you can bring her back to health and life." And that's what happened. Gladys would have laughed had she been well enough to laugh, but there was a special carriage for her, and she got to a Baptist hospital many miles away and away from the bombing. And there she came to herself, not well, but much better than she'd been. After some time, American visitors gave her money to go back to England. For 5 years she preached around England, and then she went to Formosa. It was now 1965, so Gladys was about 65 years of age. She carried on work for orphanages, did missionary work for another 5 years, and then she died. That's the story of the small woman. May I invite you to read one of the biographies, perhaps the one by Alan Burgess, Burgess. Think of what Gladys experienced in the providence of God, getting from Britain to China for about £49, escaping the OGPU, escaping howling wolves, going through the snow for miles on her own, carrying suitcases, going by mules to Yancheng, caring for muleteers in an inn, becoming the foot inspector in the districts around, and converted the Mandarin to Christianity, emerging from a collapsed building that had been bombed, organising rescue missions, then taking 100 children over the mountains and by prayer, crossing Yellow River and reaching a refugee organisation that cared for the children, and then surviving more bombing, and finally being given money to go back to England. Christ said, with God all things are possible. When Christ healed a man's sick son, and the father said, "Sir, if you can do anything, help us." And Christ said, "If you believe, all things are possible." And the man replied, "I believe, but help thou my unbelief." That's the way it is with me and with you. None of us believe perfectly, but you know, a woman that touched the fringe of the tunic of Christ was healed. Let's just make contact. We're saved by faith. Even a little faith can save if we have contact with Jesus. Make that contact today. God bless you.